Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in a few moments. Hey, everyone, if you're joining us, we'll get started in a few moments. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Connect Plus webinar on Mission Aligned Portfolio Management. I'm Cindy Lakshman, SVP of Development Services at OFN. I'm going to kick us off with some housekeeping tips and an overview of our agenda. Next slide, please. A note that we are recording this webinar, so the recording will be available within the next week on CDFI Connect and our YouTube channel. We also encourage you to use the chat function to introduce yourselves, share comments, and interact with other participants. I see some of you have started already, which is great. And then we've allotted 10 minutes at the end of the webinar for audience questions. So with that said, please feel free to submit any questions you have in the Zoom Q&A box as they occur to you. In terms of our agenda, we're going to briefly highlight our growing resource library, after which we'll transition to a panel discussion, through which we'll talk about to our panel and end with some audience Q&A. And next slide. Okay, I'd also like to acknowledge our sponsor. This webinar and associated resources we're previewing today were developed with the support from Capital One, with the intention of helping us build and facilitate access to the tools, skills, and expertise CDFIs need to better meet their missions. Next slide. So as you've likely seen or heard by now, we're building out a library of leading practices toolkits and resources for the industry as part of our Next Gen CDFI Workforce Initiative. Our intention is for the resources and toolkits to feature 1, in-depth guidance, 2, ways in which our CDFI members are operationalizing concepts into their own work, and 3, actionable content, such as examples, templates, sample language, and other resources. You can access our growing library via CDFI Connect, which is our online community for the CDFI industry. It provides a virtual space to network, collaborate, and learn from over 11,000 practitioners on the platform. So if you don't have a CDFI Connect account, you can join for free at the link noted on the slide, which we'll include in the chat as well. Once you log into CDFI Connect, you can navigate to the resources drop-down menu, select OFN resources, and then you'll see the leading practice resources folder on the left side of the page. You'll see resources we released earlier this year, such as our CDFI 101 toolkit and operationalizing racial equity, inclusion, and accessibility into lending practices. We encourage you to keep tabs on CDFI Connect to learn when we release new resources. The other thing I wanted to note is that these are living documents. So if you have ideas or requests for resources that would be helpful to you, please reach out to the Development Services team, and we'll add our email address into the chat so that you know how to reach out to us. Next slide. So today's webinar is focused on the topic of mission-aligned portfolio management, which is also the topic of a toolkit we're releasing next month. As a mission-driven, community-oriented lenders, CDFIs have to continuously consider how we integrate our mission and values into our work. A lot of the conversations around how we can meet our mission through our lending work tends to focus on the origination side. For example, how do we build the right loan products? How are we assessing risk? What does the underwriting process look like? How are we sourcing deals and building our pipeline, etc.? However, an equally important part of the conversation is focusing on the ways we can continue to integrate our values and mission after a loan closes. Ensuring borrowers successfully accomplish whatever they wanted to with the capital that they borrowed, whether it's scaling their small business or developing affordable housing for their community, is one of the key ways we achieve our impact. Our mission-aligned portfolio management toolkit is being designed to provide strategies, insights, and leading practices for how to effectively manage your portfolio while staying true to your mission and values. From activating borrower voice in your processes, managing delinquency management and covenant compliance with compassion, to borrower services and the loan review process. We'll also be covering these topics during our panel today. So I'm really excited to welcome Emily Linick, the Director of Impact Lending at Red Up Impact Investing Fund, Pedro Chavez, the Deputy Chief Credit Officer at Raza Development Fund, and Betsy Beauvais, the Chief Impact Officer at MoFi. All right, welcome everyone. I'm so excited for this panel today. And so to get us started, I'm going to ask everyone to briefly share your CDFI sector, core products, and average loan size to provide some context for those listening. And Emily, we'll start with you.
Hi everyone, my name is Emily Linick. I'm the Director of Impact Lending at Red Up Impact Investing Fund, or we call it REEF. REEF is a CDFI that works nationally to support both nonprofit and for-profit, what we call employment social enterprise. And what we mean by that is a nonprofit or for-profit that sells a good or service, a business, but that also employs people with specific barriers to employment. So we're very niche. I think we're the only CDFI that focuses specifically on employment social enterprise, but I think it's important for the context of this conversation, just our target population. I just want to state who that is. And this includes folks with barriers to employment such as former incarceration, homelessness, mental health and substance abuse challenges, survivors of domestic violence and human trafficking, refugees, and opportunity youth. We offer 3 products right now. We offer term loans, bridge loans, and lines of credit. Our average loan size is around 200,000, but we can go up to about $1 million. And we've been lending since 2017, but we became a CDFI in 2022. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Emily. Pedro? You're on mute.
Sorry, of course. First, thank you on behalf of RDF for having us on your panel. Raza Development Fund is a loan fund started as a support corporation for Unidos US, formerly known as the National Council of La Raza. It's the largest Latino civil rights and advocacy organization in the nation, with approximately 300 community-based organizations that are part of the Unidos US network. RDF is a Latino, Latinx-focused CDFI with approximately $550 million total portfolio under management, of which approximately 273 million are on book assets as of June 30th of 23 of this year. The primary industries in our on-book portfolio are education, via charter schools, around 49%, followed by housing, 27%, healthcare, 15% other, which includes small business, 5%, and then social services at 4%. And when excluding small business loans, RDF's average loan size is around 2.1 million.
Thank you. And then Betsy.
Hi, my name is Betsy Beauvais. I am from MoFi, or Montana Community Development Corporation, DBA MoFi. And we are primarily a small business lender. We've been around for about 40 years. And our geography is kind of the rural Rocky Mountain West, but Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, Nevada, and some of the Washington and Oregon as well. We also have some new markets tax credits program and a small down payment assistance program, but primarily small business lending. Our average loan size is around 100,000. We range between 1,000 to 1.5 million, and we do a range of startup, existing business purchases, term loans, lines of credit, SBA loans, etc. So kind of a wide range.
Great. So now I'm going to kind of transition. Before we kind of start talking about the nuts and bolts of portfolio management, I want to start with a big picture about, like, can you share what your guiding principles and values for how you approach portfolio management at your CDFI are? Because that underlies kind of how you approach all the different elements of portfolio management. So I wanted to start there to give people a sense, again, of what your kind of core values and mission at your CDFI are and how you're integrating them or approaching that at your CDFI. So Emily, we'll start with you again.
Sure. I think the 2 words that we focus on at REEF are transparency and trust. So that's really core to how we think about the experience of working with a borrower over time. We try to frame the entire experience, both on the originations and the portfolio management side, as a capacity building exercise, and so that they're learning from us. For a lot of these groups, it's the first time they've ever taken on debt. So we are, even if we're concerned or there's an issue with the loan, which we can get into more later, we always try to use these opportunities to as educational for them, as a way to say, we're worried and this is why, or we're really excited about, your growth, and we think we could, help you in this way. So I should also add that many of the leaders of these organizations have lived experience from the barriers that I mentioned earlier. So it's really important to us that we are creating an unbiased process, both, as part of portfolio management, and really being equitable and, really helping set them up for, taking on more debt in the future with another CDFI or a bank. So transparency and trust are really key. We show them a lot of things that are behind the scenes that another lender probably wouldn't. We'll do screen shares with them and say, we ran the debt service coverage ratio and this is what we're seeing. And, we really open it up to them. And I'll give some examples later, but I guess, we have a risk rating. They know what their risk rating is. We tell them what it means. We have an annual loan review process that, usually that's kind of behind closed doors, but we bring them into the process. We do a PowerPoint. We go through our assessment of their annual credit and ask them, they have an opportunity to ask questions. We educate if there's language that they may not have heard before. We explain what that is. So it's just really part of it's baked into to set them up for success both with our loan and the future. This idea of really explaining to them how a lender thinks, and that's kind of new and innovative, I think, and we're learning as we go.
Yeah, and we talk about, this came up when we were building our operationalizing racial equity toolkit, but it's a lot about power, because like lenders have power, and how do you kind of give some of that back to your borrowers and like really equalize the process? And that's part of what you're saying, right, with the trust and transparency. How do people understand? Because like sometimes like lending can operate behind this like red curtain or this black box, and you don't understand how decisions are made, and explaining that and doing that education, which I know is something that you all do. It seems like really imperative and really important when it comes to helping a borrower be successful. And which we'll talk more about all this, like kind of like in the coming questions. But Pedro, do you want to kind of talk to us about how you think about this at Raza?
Yeah, absolutely. So at RDF, our approach to portfolio management is centered on partnership and building trust, similarly to Emily. We are committed to the holistic well-being of our partners and community. So accordingly, our investment professionals are in frequent contact with our clients, consistent with our high-touch approach. Furthermore, different from a traditional financial institution that would take an annual review approach to portfolio management, we have embraced an ongoing portfolio review process that continuously monitors our clients' financial health and covenants. This proactive approach to monitoring our clients' financial condition gives the opportunity to partner with the clients and build that trust through providing insights garnered from our experience with many borrowers across the country, and improve outcomes both for the community as well as for our portfolio performance. And we also recognize that this is an ongoing process that definitely must be in alignment with our overall strategy, impact, and risk appetite.
Thank you. And then Betsy.
I would echo a lot of what's already been said, but I think same for us. It's integrated throughout our process. I think our market is low income and very rural. And we have, I think I've learned over the years that our borrowers just don't have collateral. And so they have great ideas and great businesses, and they're hard workers. And that shouldn't necessarily be a barrier to repayment. So we've had to figure out how to underwrite well to borrowers that lack hard assets to lend against. And I think, to both Pedro and Emily's points, I think we have a nice process. It's transparent, it's clear. We try to not use complicated words. We try to, and not because people aren't smart, but we just try to not, mire things in vernacular for people. We have simple applications, simple loan documents. Everything's in 14-point font in English instead of legalese. There's enough lawyer in there to make them secure. And I think the big thing that we do is we spend a lot of time at the beginning talking about what happens in the worst case scenario. So we put together kind of a plan B of what, because our borrowers often don't have collateral as repayment, what does it really look like if the business doesn't work out, and how does that repayment plan work? And so they kind of get a frontline view to what it would look like if it didn't work out. They buy off on it. And sometimes they don't. Sometimes they say, oh, actually, I'm not sure I want to take the next step. And so we've kind of built our whole system around making sure they know what's happening. And that if we don't have collateral, we can still make good loans that aren't risky and get repaid. And that helps them be successful.
Yeah, like the key themes I'm hearing from all of you is like that transparency and the trust, and how do you kind of make the process accessible, which is, I think, what makes CDFI stand out. It's thinking about how you work with community and help people understand what they're kind of like making credit accessible is about, thinking through all these like smaller details like loan agreements, or kind of like how you talk to a borrower throughout the life of a loan. And so if we transition to like loan monitoring and thinking about loan servicing, one of the core functions of portfolio management is managing the risk of your loan portfolio and ensuring borrowers are on track to repay their loans, both because it's how we kind of get a return of capital, but also because like the successful repayment of loan means that the borrowers achieved the goals that they wanted to when they accessed the credit in the first place. And so what strategies have you deployed and or services do you offer to support borrowers throughout the life of their loan? And Emily, we'll start with you.
Sure. Well, the key thing that we do at REEF is because we have a close partnership with REDF, we have a capacity building team. So every borrower gets a free capacity building project sometime during the life of the loan. It could be immediately after the loan closes. If, for example, we identify something in underwriting that we feel needs to be shored up kind of early on, or it could be something that they bring to us and say, we'd really love your support around X, Y, or Z. These are usually in 3 buckets, which are either some sort of financial strength component, operational, or for us, programmatic, meaning the supports around the participants of those who have barriers to employment and how they're supported in the work environment. So we provide sort of a TA project in one of those 3 areas. So that's really unique, I think, to what we do. And it's promised to those groups. And certainly it's really meant to be proactive, but we can also add additional layers of capacity building support if there are things that deteriorate in the life of the loan. So that's really the main thing. And then, as I mentioned, we just started this very sort of interactive annual loan review process where we do a site visit and we do this kind of interactive presentation with them, where there's also like an entire appendix where we're like explaining to them how we calculate different ratios, and they can ask questions about that. And we've learned, we just started this process with the CFOs and the CEOs or director of finance, whoever comes to the meeting. And there are a lot of things that that's new to them, and so just bringing them into how we think and exposing them to that and giving them an opportunity to say, this is my perception of how you perceive our risk, or we don't totally agree because we think that we've done X, Y, and Z. So it's like a very interesting open conversation. Also, REDF, we have an annual retreat that all of our borrowers are welcome to attend along with our grantees. So it's kind of a mix. But the nice thing about the retreat is it's not all like about finance or the loan. It's about our sector, employment, social enterprise. So they have an opportunity to learn from other folks. We try to connect them to other groups, another social enterprise that they could learn from if that comes up in the life of the loan, like they want to expand a new business line. Well, we might know other social enterprises that have done that. So we do a lot of making connections with other groups so that they can learn and just kind of have, so we definitely have a sense of a community, which is, I think, kind of rare, at least in my previous life in CDFIs. We're creating somewhat of a movement in a community, and they know that they're a part of something. They don't just have a loan directly. It's not just like the relationship manager and that's it. They know that there's other folks out there sort of in this constellation of social enterprise. So I think that that's important because they need that support in the life of the loan sometimes, not just through us, because we're not practitioners, but through other folks in the field. So those are a few things.
We have historically and continue to include built-in extension periods for when issues may arise. For example, in housing, when there's longer than expected construction time or delays in LIHTC approvals or fundings. Also, in addition to always being in contact with the borrower when macroeconomic conditions appear to deteriorate. We have proactively reached out to borrowers to offer assistance. So, for example, when the pandemic hit in 2020, RDF staff reached out to clients to assess any potential repayment issues and offered expedited short-term deferrals to any client that requested it. So that would be an example.
And on our side, we've done some similar things that have been mentioned, but the big thing that we spend time on the front end of our loan is helping clients understand why they're outside of bankability. And our model at MoFi is to try to get our clients refinanced as quickly as possible. So every client has a path to bankability plan that's built during underwriting that identifies what's keeping them out of being able to refinance or getting a bank loan. And so our sort of post-loan consulting team is oriented towards helping track and work on those areas with the borrower so they can see their progress throughout. And I think one of the things in that is building a relationship with a banker, which I think can be pretty intimidating and pretty hard for borrowers who may have gotten turned down initially. And so we spend time building that relationship with the banker and the client, bringing bankers to the client's business, getting them to build a relationship, and then being able to provide the banker with the background information over time of their success.
And so one of the kind of like the themes here that like I would lift up is that you are all proactive in your approach. So that's like being built into how you're thinking about portfolio managers. How do you kind of proactively support your borrowers or think ahead about what issues may arise and get ahead of it in different ways, probably based on experience. And so one of the things that like also came up out of these conversations, like I was in our prep call and kind of today, is the fact that we like there's a focus on building borrower relationships. Like because we're community oriented, because we're mission oriented lenders, working really closely with our borrowers and establishing a good relationship with them is so important. For our success and to have the kind of impact that we want. And so I want to dive deeper into it and focus more specifically on borrower relationship management. Can you share ways in which you're seeking to really build those relationships with your borrowers? Betsy, you kind of started mentioning some of that. Emily, can you tell us more about how you do that at Reef?
Yeah, well, we have a very high touch model, so we don't have a huge ratio of loans per portfolio manager. So that's part of our our model. I mean, I know we're not here to talk about originations, but I would say it really starts so early on because we spend so much time with them, structuring the loan or even applying pre-TA if they're not totally capital ready. So they've already worked with us sometimes for 6 to 9 months before we even close a loan, in some cases, to be honest. So we've built some trust even before it transfers over to portfolio management, and it's just a lot of frequent contact. We meet with borrowers quarterly, typically, sometimes monthly, depending again on the risk rating. And I think the other thing is we try to be proactive. We mentioned that word earlier, but we get their newsletters. If we hear about something cool they're doing, we try to reach out to them and say, oh wow, we want to feature you in our newsletter. So it's not like they're only hearing from us when we're concerned that something's going wrong. They're hearing from us because we value their expertise and their knowledge. We invite them to be on panels that we do. So they're, we actually compensate our social enterprises to advise other social enterprises, and we offer them like a discount on their interest, for example, because again, we're like a learning community. So we try to, I think, make them feel that like, none of us are entrepreneurs, and a lot of the folks, they've been through a lot, they've had a lot of barriers and they've achieved a lot. So we try to really honor sort of asset frame what they're bringing to the table. So I think through just, again, a lot of frequent contact, it's not transactional. It's pretty close relationship. And the other thing that we do very specifically is we interview our borrowers after we close a loan and after they pay off a loan, to hear their voice. What was the experience like? What could we do better? So we've already sort of aggregated some findings from that. So that's really important, is just including their voice in this process, and not just sort of talking at them, but talking with them, having a conversation.
Are there any changes that you're able to share, like any specific examples of like kind of like what came out of that and how you ended up like shifting your process or modifying it?
One of the big themes is like how overwhelming they find the process to be, frankly. They're like, wow, I just didn't realize like how much time this would take and how many questions you guys would have. It's a pretty in-depth underwriting. And I think what we learned from that is framing it better and differently, like, because it's tempting to say, oh, we're going to make this really easy for you, and the loan application is really fast, which is in some way true, but we have so many follow-up questions. And so again, we started to reframe it as like, this is going to be a stretch exercise for you all. Like, it's going to take time, but our hope is that it's going to open up doors in the future. And we kind of tell them that now, like, this is going to be, it's not a super quick underwriting process. We're going to do a site visit. It's going to be a full day, so that we're setting better expectation up front with them, for example, to say like, this is going to be an involved process. But then we also say, well, other borrowers have told us that this has helped them, get financing after they've paid off our loan. So just, I think, being a little more transparent in telling them like, you're gonna need a point person who's gonna have to like, field their questions. So, because I think they think once they fill out the application, like that's it, and then it's gonna go from there. But the application is just really like the tip of the iceberg. So it's just been reframing for us and telling them, please understand we're doing this to help you, rather than just kind of going through the motions. Like, we really want you to understand. And like so I guess there's maybe some others, but I'll stop there. It's really about like setting expectation that it's going to be more involved than they may think from day one.
Yeah, and you all mentioned kind of like Peter, Betsy, Emily, you all talked about kind of like capacity building services and like the services that you offer to borrowers. And I do think that like that education is a service to a borrower, like all of that stuff that those conversations that time, if it's used right, can be really helpful to people. Like I remember being on when I was on the lending side, right? Like always having that conversation, be like, I know this is a long process. Like I know that this is something that might seem like kind of like you don't understand the point of it. Like let me help explain it so that it makes sense. Peter, what do you all do at Raza?
Well, from our experience, building relationships starts with connecting with and listening to our partners. RDF takes the time to do site visits with our partners and learn more about their organizations. But specifically for our Unidos US affiliates, we have an affiliate support program that provides technical assistance and capacity building opportunities to help organizations with a range of challenges, from board development to preparing financial projections, right? So also, as mentioned earlier, our philosophy is based on building partnership and trust. So it's not uncommon for RDF staff to work with potential clients for months, or I know of cases of even years, to prepare them for financing. So by the time we actually do fund a loan, there are already deep connections with our clients, which we maintain through regular contact and support, as I mentioned earlier.
And are there any examples of kind of like what that's looked like for you? Like when like you've been able to like leverage that relationship post closing to kind of like help a borrower be successful in a different way?
We've seen it also in terms of, like, let's say NMTC, relationships that develop not just through that end up doing a source loan and so on and so forth, but as I mentioned, through our affiliate support network for entities. I can mention an entity in Puerto Rico which was very challenging to close, just because even there was a learning curve on our end as well, just because the legalities in Puerto Rico are a little bit more different than in the continental US. So yeah, like RDF is in a very interesting position, just because we have this affiliate support network, and we support the affiliates in the Unidos US. So we are able to, we share that one common goal, and that's like the central piece of our focus, right?
And Betsy, is there anything else that you kind of wanted to share based on like about how you build borrower relationships at MoFi?
Yeah, I would just add, we have really large geography. It takes like 12 hours to drive across the state of Montana. And if you think about our overall geographic footprint, it's really vast. And so we've had to rely, I think, on some technology to help assist with the relationship building, just because it's impossible to be in all those places. I think, so we spend a lot of time on Zoom with people and on the phone. But I think we have put some of our most empathetic, best communicator people at the front of our process. They are truly some of the kindest people who work in our organization. And every client gets a phone call at the initial place to give them an assessment of the likelihood of the loan approval. We ran some data analytics on our portfolio to help figure some of those pieces out. And then I think the other thing that we've done is we've really reduced over time the burden of paperwork submission. And so not asking for everything up front, we try to ask for things in phases with people when we need them, so that we're not asking for things if their loan's going to get denied that we don't need until later. And then I think, the investment in technology, I think, has been pretty intentional around, just because you can't get a bank loan doesn't mean you shouldn't have a nice process that feels modern and nice to get through. And so I think that, and then I think just in general, the same things: friendly, non-technical words, lots of client time, lots of relationship building. I think they have a human being, that same person closes their loan and to stays connected to them. And we think it's working, because almost every one of our clients reaches out to us before they have a problem right now. It's very unusual for us to have problems that we don't know are coming.
That's great. That's pretty impressive. And I think that's like, it's part of like the CDFI business model, like that ability to do what you all do, which is like build a strong borrower relationships, really show up as a lender, show people you care, like spend the time working with them, no matter kind of how long it takes to be able to get to yes. Like all of those things lead to us, like even as an industry, you know, like we like have that data from like OFN members about the like charge off ratios are like has been like less than 0.7% over the last 5 years. Like that's really impressive. And it takes a lot of work to make sure that we can meet our mission and meet our fiduciary responsibilities in a way that's like delivering impact in our communities. And so I do kind of like, we're gonna like, the next question is really related around how do we support and balance supporting borrowers in times of financial hardship with our fiduciary responsibilities when issues arise. And so like we do have this like, you know, pretty low charge off ratio as an industry, but it doesn't mean that things don't happen. And it doesn't mean that it takes a lot of work at different points of the process to make sure that a borrower is still able to like have access to credit, that like if things are going awry with the loan, that it doesn't end up being kind of like it's written off or they have worse credit as a result. And so I think this is where the rubber hits the road a little bit or a lot of it for CDFIs when like the stuff comes up in the process and you're like, what do we do now? Like, how do we kind of balance these two sides of what we need to do, which is like make sure that we're like managing our capital, but also supporting our borrower when they're having a tough time. And so like that might be when loans are past due, if they're on your watch list, if they're out of compliance with a covenant on their loan agreement. So Emily, we're going to start with you.
Yeah, well, this is definitely not easy, especially when you tout yourself as such a trust-based lender. But, you know, we've definitely encountered this. We've had to do a lot of, you know, modifications and deferrals. I think in terms of, I think, again, there's an it all comes down to sort of talking with them really openly and honestly to say, a lot of it is, you know, they miss their projections around growth. And so, you know, they need a longer interest only period than we thought, or, you know, something. So then it really becomes like an exercise to say, well, let's work together on, you know, what are your most realistic projections? What was missed? Let's go back to the underwriting. We kind of try to hold them accountable to what we originally heard from them in as gentle a way as possible to understand like where did things go wrong. And then, so I think our first approach is certainly to kind of understand what happened and then, you know, figure out what's realistic. But where we've been flexible around modifications and deferrals under the circumstances that we understand what the end game is, like what is going to be adjusted. And then usually we kind of up our ante of frequency once we've done something like that so that it doesn't just ride on for another 6 months of interest only. Like we try to really make sure then we're checking in with them much more often to say, you know, how can we support or so. Yeah, we have loans on the watch list that require, you know, more support, and you know, sometimes you have to say no, and again, we always try to explain the why. You know, we've had a lot of requests for like additional debt, to be honest, and sometimes we can allow it if the borrower is strong and they can support it, and sometimes we have to explain like we can't allow it, and here's why, and we actually show them the ratio and what we're seeing. So it's just a conversation. It's not easy. And then I think in the last question, Sindhu, I can give maybe more of the specific example, but it's just, I think, again, but because we've built the trust, it's usually easier to deliver a pretty firm message around something that maybe isn't going well, but we always do it from a curiosity, like what's happening here. And I think, frankly, they also know that we're a new fund, and we want REEF to continue so that we can support other social enterprises. So I think there's a little bit of a sense of like they're aware that you know, we're doing our best for them. They know that we're trying to advocate to the extent that we can. We're going to stretch as far as we can, up until the point though that we are saying, you know, we do expect to be repaid. We do expect you know, things to take a turn for the positive, but we're willing to meet you halfway in thinking about what that might look like, you know. So that's some starting thoughts, stuff there.
Yeah, this is like, it could be a webinar on its own, but yeah, some like brief thoughts. Pedro?
Well, to preface this, our historical charge-offs are very low, below 1%. But in addition to modifications and deferrals, and as indicated before, not to sound like a broken record, but we maintain constant communication with our borrowers, especially in times of hardship. And we try to seek flexible solutions tailored to the situation, obviously with an eye on protecting our balance sheet, but while also supporting the communities that we serve. And to the other portion of your question, staff members do receive training and are kept current on best practices pertaining to delinquency and loan workouts. And more importantly, though, they provide empathetic yet candid feedback to clients, right? Because we do find that honest, being honest, being candid, provided gently, providing this feedback gently and with kindness yields the best results.
Yeah, and on that staff training piece, we haven't talked about it a lot, but I do know from like individual conversations with you all that is a core kind of part of what you do at your CDFIs is really making sure that your staff are trained and like understand the right way to kind of communicate with borrowers and talk to them. I mean, Pedro, what are you all doing at RDF? Like, is there like a kind of like when people come into the organization, like what does staff training look like for you all on this aspect?
You mean when they come in with an issue about delinquency? Well, first of all, like it would be tackled from the investment professional. They usually would contact the investment professional, and then if the investment professional will start looking for solutions and come to more senior staff, and then we'll try to craft whatever. So we'll evaluate what the issue is, whatever the issue may be, and try to come up with at least 3 different outcomes or 3 types of different alternative solutions to the issue, and then we try to figure out which one will work best. I think that's the way I would put it.
Yeah, it's like that. It's a collaborative model, right? Is what you're what you're talking about is the fact that like you problem solve as a team together, and that's like where that education's happening, really.
Right, and and we're fortunate enough that as Emily, I believe, mentioned earlier, it's not to talk about origination, but it all starts from so early on, right? So like by the time if something were to happen, with everybody's so well acquainted with the client that there might be already solutions in the back of our heads.
Yeah, absolutely. Betsy?
Yeah, and I think for us, the thing that's really helped us with this, again, is this written plan B of what happens if things go wrong. And I'll give you an example of it later, but I think that we usually at least have a starting place that the client's already signed off to on what happens when things are hard and how to solve it. So we do some of the normal things like figure out if it's a short-term problem or a long-term problem. And then short-term, we're really flexible with deferrals, although we do always try to, even with deferrals, keep people paying, even if it's $10 a month, just to keep them connected to us and keep the conversation, make sure the bank account's still current. And then I think because, our solution is not typically collateral liquidation. We want to keep the client connected and paying what they can afford. And because it's so stressful for people when this is happening, I mean, it is a horrible place to be as a business owner. I think we try to work with our borrowers. We write things off pretty quickly, so we have a lot of flexibility. And then we allow them to partially dictate what that plan looks like. And so I think they feel empowered by being a part of that system of what they truly can afford. And even that means that they're going to pay us off over 14 years. We've structured something that feels manageable for them and keeps them paying.
Yeah, I've like heard kind of like MoFi's model before. Like I've heard kind of you all talk about it. And I think it's so interesting, right? That because that's from a strategic choice to be like, all right, if we're able to like if we charge off the borrower, then we have the flexibility on the back end to kind of think about like what works best for them. It actually gives you the ability to think about things outside of like processes and policies to be like, all right, it's already off the book. So now like what do we do to meet the borrower's needs in the best way that we can?
And I think that plan B, building it up front and then having that flexibility, it just makes people feel more respected and like aware of what the process is because they've heard it before at a time when it wasn't stressful.
Yeah. All right, and so I want to kind of like dive a little bit deeper to share examples now. So can you share an example of an issue you've had to work through that illustrates how you've been able to put your policies and practices into action to deliver this mission-aligned outcome that we're all seeking? And like, what were the takeaways that you had from this situation? And then Emily, we'll start with you.
Sure, yeah, and I forgot to mention just in the last question, to your point about like, do we train staff around this? Just two quick comments. We do, because we're part of REDF, we did a whole workshop on like asset framing and thinking about things through an asset framed approach, and we had a trainer do that, so that was really interesting. And then we also, but then the total like antithesis of that is that we do send some of our staff to the Risk Management Association courses on troubled loans, things like that, which is very cut and dry. But then the idea is to blend the sort of two philosophies. But as far as a specific example, I guess two things come to mind. Frankly, we've had a few borrowers take on debt without getting our approval first. And we know that because we look at their balance sheet and all of a sudden we see something we didn't see before. And so that opens up a conversation. And that's an example where we have to, address it with them and have an honest conversation to say, hey, what happened here? And, we, as many times as we go through the loan agreement with them when we close the loan and we try to explain that covenant and why it's there to protect them and to protect us, they sometimes either they completely forget or their back is against the wall and they don't want to tell us, even though they trust us, but they want to show us their best. And so so we have to talk with them about it. And again, it's not a great situation. We always issue a reservation of rights letter, but we let them know it's coming. We let them know what it means. We then explain to them, well, we'd like to try to get this debt subordinated, and we explain what that means. And we say, here's a subordination agreement. Can you put us in touch with that lender? And now we, so it does, it's still something we have to be firm about, and have a certain amount of rigor around, but we do try to use it as a learning opportunity, for them. Another very specific example that just happened recently, which we learned a lot from, is that again, trust-based lending, we're not a bank, we're small, we're relatively small. So we had a borrower contributing to a reserve account, but it wasn't a controlled account by REEF. But they had to submit to us every month the amount that they were contributing to the reserve and show us a snapshot. So that was our thought, thinking that was good enough. Well, then they took money out of the reserve to not in a malicious way, but to essentially make payroll. And we didn't, that wasn't the purpose of the fund. The purpose of the reserve had a different purpose. So that was really the first time I probably within really very, very quick succession was I need to have a meeting with all of you tomorrow. But because I had built the trust with them, but I had to have a really, direct conversation to say that just as a reminder, and I showed them the language and tried to say, this was there to protect against something else, and that's not what it was used for. And so obviously, it comes back to how do you want to adjust from there? Do we then say, okay, well, from now on that didn't work and REEF's going to do all controlled accounts, or obviously we've stretched far toward the trust piece, but in this case, it was, again, there was nothing nefarious about it. It was just they were in a pinch and they thought they could use it for that purpose. And so we try to work with them around what was the original intent and why is that a violation of the loan agreement, and they were very much we're going to put the money back in the next week as soon as we can. So it all actually, but it also brought to light bigger issues with that loan, that they hadn't totally shared with us. So it actually in the end was a good thing because it was a wake-up call for everybody to have a real honest conversation about the state of that business. So maybe too detailed, but I think it's good to have an example, and that's a recent occurrence.
Yeah, I think that's probably, it's our audience is probably very much practitioners who are in the weeds. So having that the detailed example is super helpful. Yeah, it's always so fascinating to think about these parts. I mean, I remember when I used to negotiate loan agreements, people would have these thoughts about they're the loan agreement's so long, why are all these covenants in there? Are you going to call us into default? And it's well, no, our goal isn't to put you into default, right? It's to have a conversation. So basically, these are just indicators for us of hey, we might need to actually have a conversation about this, or it's a trigger to make sure that you are proactive and that we're able to problem solve ahead of time before things get really bad. And unlike other lenders, if they do this and it's a genuine mistake or they just didn't know better, that you're able to be hey, we'll work this out. It's not you owe us X amount tomorrow because we're calling the loan. Pedro?
Sorry, I was having a little issue here. We're going to order the example, correct?
Yes.
So one of our loans, the loan got disbursed right before the pandemic, and it was in the food service industry, and the client could not make payments, and because trust built, they reached out proactively to us, and then we started looking to find a solution, but at the moment, it became apparent that liquidation was necessary. So like we're kind of worst case scenario. So although like liquidation was necessary, we stood by them throughout the whole process, and then we provided time and assistance throughout the whole process. And then senior members of staff put the client in direct contact with third parties to maximize the sale of the collateral, which visually relieved the client anxiety through the process, and also minimize the impact to RDF. So that's the example.
It's a great example. Yeah, I think whenever I talk to CFIs, what always stands out to me is like when things get into like the delinquency or the like trouble debt restructuring process or the modification process, I think I in a way actually see the best of CDFIs, because it's like sticking through with the borrower to make sure that like that housing development gets built, or like the small business still survives. Like if like it was any other lender, it might not actually happen that way, right? It might be that affordable housing doesn't get built, or that small business closes. And so I think in a lot of ways, like this mission aligned portfolio management really shows kind of like the best of what we can do when we're in it for the long haul. Betsy?
Yeah, I would just add an example of a business. We financed a startup brewery in rural Idaho a couple of years ago, about 2 to 3 years. And we had put together the plan B for them. They were pretty light on collateral. They had some credit things, but had a good history over time. We have pretty conservative collateral policies. So we valued their equipment, I think, at 0 or maybe 10% of the actual value. And the plan B that he would sell it and get a job and repay it. And we went through that at underwriting. 2 to 3 years in, business just wasn't working. It's been a tough couple of years for businesses. He's been calling us for the last 6 months. He finally got to the place where he was like, I don't think I can keep doing this. We wrote off the loan. We worked with him to figure out what he could afford for payments for right now. He's selling the equipment that'll pay down the loan, and then he's in the process of getting a job. And so it is, I think, for us, an example of like, it really works when you do it ahead of time, which is always nice. It's like good reassurance, like, oh, this thing actually works. And he's been really easy and communicative to work with. And I think even with a hard situation, it's gone pretty well.
And I appreciate you, because I think it's like, it's hard to talk about when things don't go well, right? It's like, obviously you want everything to go according to plan. You want everyone to kind of be successful, but like sometimes it just like, it doesn't work out, and it's actually what's best for that borrower, right? Is not like, in this case, you had a plan B, and it's like, it seems like the borrower's like pretty happy with like, or not, as happy as he can be with like where things have landed. And I think being able to talk about that transparently is really important, so that we can have like kind of open conversations around like not everything's going to go perfectly all the time. It's okay when it doesn't, and that we're able to still have a resolution that makes sense for the borrower and for you. Yeah. All right. And with that, we're going to kind of transition to our last question. So if you're listening in, it's now your cue to start dropping questions into the chat or the Q&A box. And then for all of you, Betsy, Emily, Pedro, your closing question. So as CFI practitioners, you know this, but you often have a lot of competing demands on your time. Right. And so if there's one thing that you recommend that those listening in today do to better align their portfolio management with their mission and values, what would it be? And Emily, we start with you.
Again, I think the one thing that I would recommend is listen to your borrowers, because you can learn from their experience of going through the process with your CDFI, how to improve. So we've sort of like operationalized some listening mechanisms where we interview the borrowers and learn a lot from that. So that's what I would say, is like, don't lend in a vacuum where you're sort of like, we're the all-knowing lender and they're the beneficiary. Like, that's not, we have a lot to learn from our borrowers. Us in particular, we do at REEF, because again, we're working with some leaders who, have been incarcerated. They've survived homelessness. They're in recovery for 30 years. Like, these are folks who, been through a lot and have different life experience than maybe some of us on staff do, but want to honor like what they've done, what they've achieved, what their business is. So just like approaching, like making sure you're including their voice, approaching it with humility and listening to what they have to say.
I would say go into a transaction with your eyes open. get to know your clients, their mission, their management, finances, and keep a close relationship with them. Be honest and offer your best insights. And to a point earlier, always listen to for novel solutions to challenges. And if you don't have at least 3 alternative solutions, keep looking until you do, and then figure out which one will work best.
And I think on my end, I think making sure your policies really match what you do in practice. And I don't mean people are not following policies, but really taking a look at what your policies say. I know when I first started here a long time ago, we had an equity policy for our underwriting of 10%. Not a single one of our borrowers ever met that policy. It wasn't an indicator of repayment. And so really looking at things that you might be doing in practice because they're policies, but they're not actually making your portfolio healthier, your underwriting better. And so having as much flexibility to be able to really meet borrowers where they're at on a policy level.
Well, it's great advice, and this conversation has been so interesting and so valuable, and I hope it has been for our attendees too. But now it's their turn to ask questions instead of me. And so we've gotten actually quite a few come in, so I'm going to start with the ones that we've gotten already. But if you have any questions, please continue to drop them into the chat. And so one of the first ones we got was, how do you handle end-of-year site visits for every client, and what's your client load? So I'm guessing kind of like, this is more asking about like the ratio of like clients per staff member, and then how you're thinking through end of year site visits or site visits more generally. Anyone want to jump in?
I think this is hard, especially hard because we have so many places to go. We do a lot of site visits over FaceTime because of geography constraints. There's just, if we make 400 loans a year, we have about 30 staff and hundreds of miles of geography. Sometimes it's hard to actually physically be in all those places, but we'll do site visits just with kind of a phone and check in with clients. And so that's kind of one of the ways we've done it. And then as we have people on the road, we have folks stop in and visit businesses and say hello.
So on our end, for all our NMTC transactions and tentative deals, we do physical site visits. Only exceptions was during the pandemic when, obviously, that was a little bit restricted. But we also do site visits sometimes to our affiliates, even if they're not our clients, right? Again, them being the focus of what we, the reason why we were created as RDF. So, and that's something we've been doing more. So let's say, for example, meaning like RDF, staff, and I was part of that committee, if you would, not committee, but the people that went into this conference. So let's say 6 people went from from our organization, and then we divided ourselves to go visit, as many affiliates as we could. And this conference was in Chicago, so we went to a lot of our affiliates in Chicago to try to know them and for them to know us, and just show them that we had that affiliate support program, for example. So we do think it's really important for us to have like that FaceTime with our clients and our potential clients and our affiliates.
Yeah, same for us. I mean, we definitely prioritizing the visits. You learn a lot. And we make the visits are usually like a good solid half day to full day. I feel like you need that time to really see how things are playing out. If we don't have the capacity, we would prioritize groups on our watch list for sure. Because right now we only have one portfolio manager for about 17 or 18 active loans. So of course we're going to hire up on that side, but if we have to prioritize, we would prioritize those that need our closer eye, of course.
Yeah, and I think like an important kind of piece of the context, right, is that like different CDFIs will have different models depending on kind of like your products, your loan volume, how you kind of like what your target market is, kind of like where you're operating geographically. And so like the things that work for each of your CDFIs will kind of be based on what your client needs are and kind of your staffing model. And then there's this like a little bit of a related question, but not entirely. So there's a question around like how you can scale this borrower engagement, like because like you all talked about engaging deeply with borrowers in different ways. Depending on the size of the transaction and average loan size, that this seems tenable with larger transactions and less so as the loans get smaller. And then there's like, that person was also asking if you've been able to connect these strategies, like the deeper engagement, to a correlated impact on delinquency and default rates. So like, I guessing like, have you seen those go down? Have you seen those like, basically, can you like point to the fact that this is paid off and that you've been able to see that translate to your ratios?
I would say on the, we have a pretty wide range of loan sizes. We do a lot of lending that's under the 50K mark, and sort of more micro product. And we have used some technology and data analytics to do more of the initial screening upfront so that there's less time with just people who might get through the process. And we've been able to use that to pretty accurately predict who's going to get loans pretty early on. And so that's just reduced, I think, the number of people at the touch points, by just looking at kind of who in our portfolio pays back and how that applies to smaller loans. But everyone still gets at least some kind of face-to-face experience during underwriting, even if it's on a Zoom call, to have that engagement. And certainly the larger the loans, there's often just more conversation, more to talk about. So that engagement naturally is higher the larger the loan. But that's been kind of our strategy. And in terms of correlation, our delinquency rates have stayed pretty similar over time. I think the thing that we've seen from external surveying is that our clients are happier than they have. Like we've seen an increase in client satisfaction with the process as we've done things like simplify loan agreements, change some of our front end processes, and add technology.
I think on our end, it's so going again into our focus being our affiliates from UNEO's US network, right, which is the communities that we serve. I think obviously it's hard not to take a look at the larger loan size first, but in reality, what we want to make sure is that we're focused on the communities that we want to serve and the impact that would yield, right? So and that's a process we're currently ongoing with impact, measuring our impact and the relationship with our risk appetite and the profitability of those loans. So it's in the works to make a better impact, and we're almost done actually, but what I can tell you right now, our focus is mainly on the communities that we serve and the impact. And then obviously if they're an affiliate of UNEO's US, then we'll definitely, we'll be engaging with them regardless of what the dollar amount is, right? Because of that impact first approach. And then, on our smaller portion of our portfolio, which is small business, then we take we've taken a different strategy, which is focusing on affiliates that do have like small business as their clients, if you would. So it would be downstreaming that capital. So that seems to be working, but again, we're currently undergoing some strategy, doing a review of our strategy and how it links with our impact and our risk appetite. So TBD.
We'll have to do a follow-up to hear how it all ends. Ellie, do you want to weigh in or?
No, if there's a different question, or I don't know if we're going to get cut off any moment here, but you tell us how you want to spend the last minutes and do.
Perfect. Actually, there was a question that Betsy, I think, you can, someone want to clarify kind of how your business, like your model works on when it comes to charging off. So it's like when you charge off and then like being flexible on the back end, does that mean that you're flexible as it relates to settlement after default? And then are you reporting the loan as a default then to personal or business credit, and then reversing reporting depending on how they land with settlement? It was the kind of framing of the question.
Yeah, so the second we think somebody's sort of headed to a place where business is closing or they can't make the payment, we write it off so that we have flexibility from, you know, our other sources, and then we can meet the client where they're at. At that point, if they are, after the loan's restructured, and they're paying that as agreed, there's no need to report that as a defaulted loan to credit because they've restructured and are now paying as agreed. What was the first part of the question? Did I answer it?
I think you did, yeah. So it's like
Okay.
basically how what does that actual process look like, what you did. And then like I've heard you all talk about this, right? Basically, if like someone ends up coming back into payment, then you just like you reverse it, right? So it's no longer you like kind of like put on your balance sheet.
Recoveries.
Like yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And we often have significant recoveries.
Awesome. So that does close us out. And so with that, I will say thank you to our panelists for being here. We really appreciate your insights and your time, and to all our attendees for joining us for another afternoon webinar. And so if you are coming to our conference in a few weeks, we look forward to seeing you in person in DC. And if not, we hope you'll join us for our future webinars that are coming out in Q4. And then keep an eye on CDFI Connect for this mission aligned portfolio management toolkit that we'll be putting out. All right. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Bye.